Everything you think you know about medieval knights is a carefully constructed lie. We see the image in our heads instantly. A warrior in gleaming plate armor, a paragon of virtue. He follows a strict code of honor, defends the weak, shows mercy to his enemies, and treats all women with the utmost respect. This is the code of chivalry, the very foundation of what it meant to be a knight. But what if I told you that this code was mostly a fantasy? What if I told you that the average knight was often closer to a modern-day gangster or a ruthless mercenary than he was to Sir Galahad? For centuries, we have been fed a romanticized story, a story of honor and valor that whitewashes a much darker, more brutal, and far more interesting reality. The biggest lie you still believe about medieval knights isn't about how heavy their armor was or how they got onto their horses. It's about their soul. It's about the very code they supposedly lived and died for. Stay with me, because we are about to peel back the layers of myth and uncover the shocking truth about the so-called chivalrous knight. And what you learn will change the way you see the Middle Ages forever. So, where did we get this idea of the perfect honorable knight? It came from stories. Epic poems like the Song of Roland and the romantic tales of King Arthur and his Round Table, written centuries after the events they described. These were the Hollywood blockbusters of their day. They weren't history books. They were entertainment, and they were propaganda. They were written for nobles, by people employed by nobles, to tell them how they ought to act. It was an ideal to aspire to, a sort of branding for the warrior class. The Code of Chivalry itself was never a single written document that every knight swore an oath to. It was a loose collection of ideals that changed over time and from place to place. Sure, it included things we'd recognize: courage, loyalty to your lord, and defending the church. But right from the start, there was a massive, unspoken asterisk at the end of every rule. A footnote that read, "Terms and conditions apply." And those terms were almost always about social class. The courtesy, the mercy, the honor, it was primarily intended for other nobles. A knight was expected to treat a captured enemy knight with respect, not because he was a good person, but because that captured knight was a valuable commodity. You didn't kill him on the battlefield if you could help it. You captured him and held him for a crippling ransom. It was the medieval equivalent of a golden parachute. That captured duke might be your cousin, or you might need him as a political bargaining chip. He was part of your club. But a peasant? A common foot soldier? They weren't in the club. They had no ransom value. They were seen as little more than farm equipment. The so-called Code of Chivalry offered them almost no protection whatsoever. This isn't just an oversight. It's the central, hidden truth of the entire system. Chivalry was a code of conduct for the 1%. By the 1%. And when it came to the other 99%, all bets were off. The biggest lie is that chivalry was a moral guide for protecting society. It wasn't. It was a set of professional guidelines and social signals designed to maintain the power and wealth of the aristocratic warrior class. It was a system that allowed a knight to be celebrated for sparing the life of a rival duke in the morning, and then burn a village full of peasants to the ground in the afternoon without seeing any contradiction in his actions. Think about that for a second. The entire romantic edifice of knighthood is built on a foundation of brutal class distinction. The hero we imagine protecting the innocent was often the very person they needed protection from. Still don't believe me? Let's look at the historical record. Let's look at what knights actually did. Welcome to the 100 Years' War, the long and brutal conflict between England and France. This was the supposed golden age of chivalry, and one of the main English strategies during this war was something called the chevauchée. This sounds fancy, but it was one of the most savage forms of warfare imaginable. A chevauchée was a massive, destructive raid deep into enemy territory. It wasn't about capturing castles or winning glorious battles. The goal was to inflict maximum pain on the civilian population. Knights, the supposed protectors of the weak, would lead armies of thousands on these rampages. Their job was to burn towns, slaughter livestock, destroy crops, and terrorize the common people into submission. They did this to ruin the enemy's economy and to prove that the French king couldn't protect his own subjects. It was medieval shock and awe. Let's talk about one of the most famous knights of the age, a man held up as a pinnacle of chivalry, Edward, the Black Prince, heir to the English throne. In 1370, during one of these campaigns, the city of Limoges, which had previously been allied with him, surrendered to the French. The Black Prince was furious. He besieged the city, and when it fell, he unleashed his knights. The chronicles of the time, even those written by people who admired him, paint a horrifying picture. Men, women, and children running through the streets, begging for mercy at the prince's feet. He was so consumed by rage that he ignored them. His knights went on a rampage, slaughtering over 3,000 civilians. They were not enemy soldiers. They were unarmed men, women, and children. So much for defending the helpless. Where was the code of chivalry then? The truth is, it didn't apply. The people of Limoges weren't nobles. They didn't count. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This was standard operating procedure. This was the reality of knightly warfare. But surely, they weren't all like that? What about the knights who dedicated their lives to tournaments and winning a lady's favor? Let's talk about a real German knight named Ulrich von Liechtenstein. He wrote an autobiography in the 1200s, detailing his adventures. On the surface, it's all about chivalry. He describes traveling across Europe in disguise, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love, challenging any knight he met to a joust in honor of his lady. He broke over 300 lances. It sounds romantic, right? But when you read between the lines, it was all about ego and performance. He describes cutting off his own finger and sending it to the lady he loved when she didn't believe his affections were real. He describes his jousts in excruciating detail, focusing on his own glory and fame. It was a sport for the rich, a way to show off their martial skill and wealth to their peers. The common folk were just spectators to this elaborate and violent theater. His story shows that even when knights were trying to be chivalrous, it was often an incredibly self-absorbed and performative act, not a selfless code of virtue. Let's go deeper. What happened when there was no war to fight? Did knights go home and protect their local communities? Some did, but many became a terrifying problem. Bands of unemployed knights and their men-at-arms, known as free companies, would roam the countryside, essentially operating as high-end protection rackets. They were soldiers without a war, and they used their military skills to extort towns and villages, demanding payment in exchange for not burning them to the ground. They were, for all intents and purposes, medieval mafiosos in armor. The very people they were supposed to protect became their victims. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the lie of chivalry comes from the Crusades, specifically the Albigensian Crusade in the early 13th century. This wasn't a crusade against a foreign enemy. This was a war launched by the Pope against a group of Christians in the south of France known as the Cathars, who were deemed heretics. Thousands of knights from northern France eagerly answered the call to go south and fight. Why? For God, perhaps, but also because the Pope promised them the lands of the heretic nobles they conquered. It was a Holy Land grab. In 1209, the Crusader Knights arrived at the city of Béziers. It was a city of both Catholics and Cathars. When the city refused to surrender, the knights attacked. According to one chronicler, when a soldier asked the papal legate, a high-ranking cleric, how they should tell the heretics from the faithful Catholics inside, he gave a chilling and infamous reply: "Kill them all. God will know his own." And they did. The knights, the supposed defenders of the faith, swarmed into the city and massacred nearly the entire population. An estimated 20,000 people were killed in a single day. Again, these were not soldiers on a battlefield. These were civilians in their own homes. This brutal act was committed by the same class of men we imagine kneeling in prayer and vowing to protect the innocent. The lie of chivalry is so persistent because it's a story we want to believe. It gives us a sense of order and honor in a brutal and chaotic time. But by believing the lie, we do a disservice to history. We ignore the brutal reality of class, the horrors of medieval warfare, and the suffering of ordinary people. The truth is, a knight was a highly specialized, armored weapon system, a human tank. And like any weapon, his morality was determined by the person who wielded him and the system he operated within. That system was feudalism, a system built on a rigid hierarchy where the vast majority of people were powerless. Chivalry wasn't created to protect those people. It was created to manage the small, violent, elite group at the top. It was a set of rules for the wolves on how not to eat each other. It said nothing about what they could do to the sheep. So the next time you see a movie or read a book about a valiant knight in shining armor, remember the truth. Remember the chevauchée, remember the sack of Limoges, remember the free companies and the massacre at Béziers. The armor may have been shining, but the hands that wore it were often covered in the blood of the very innocents they were supposed to protect. If this video challenged what you thought you knew about history, then do me a favor and hit that like button. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next dive into the lies you've been told about the past. Thanks for watching.